Today, we're diving into the story of a fashion icon who did more than just design clothes. She basically designed a new way for women to live. But her story, well, it's way more complicated than the elegant design she's famous for. And it all kicks off with one really powerful idea.
To be irreplaceable, one must always be different. That wasn't just some clever catchphrase for her. It was the engine that took a lonely little girl from a French orphanage and rocketed her to the very top of the fashion world, making her one of the most influential and, as we'll see, controversial designers in all of history.
So, to really understand the legend, you have to go right back to the beginning. And this story, it doesn't start with Coco. It starts with a little girl named Gabrielle Chanel. Her life started out in a pretty strict orphanage, where the nuns thought she was, well, strange, different. While all the other girls were out playing, Gabrielle was obsessed with a needle and thread. And that little obsession, that difference, was the tiny seed of a skill that would one day change fashion forever. Her whole journey was about reinvention. I mean, she was born into poverty back in 1883, and then after her mother died, she was sent to a convent at just 11 years old. That's where she learned to sew. Fast forward a bit, and as a young woman, she's a seamstress by day, but a singer on stage at night, which is actually where soldiers in the audience gave her that iconic nickname, Coco. So all of that, her background, it didn't just shape who she was, it literally fueled a revolution. See, Chanel's vision wasn't just about making new clothes, it was about creating a whole new kind of freedom for women. And this slide, wow, it just perfectly shows you the world she was up against. On one side, you've got the fashion of the time, these painfully tight corsets, massive heavy dresses, crazy ornate hats. I mean, women could barely move, let alone breathe. And then there's Chanel's vision. Comfort, simple elegance, and the freedom to actually, dance, work, and just live your life. So how did she actually do it? Well, it was like a step-by-step takeover. It all started with hats. Super simple, elegant designs that were just a world away from those giant feathered things everyone else was wearing. Then came her first little shop in Paris. Pretty soon, she was designing these straight, simple dresses that were just scandalously comfortable. And then, bam, she gives the world the little black dress and the iconic Chanel No. 5 perfume. Game over. She'd cemented her place in history. If you boil everything down to one thing, this is probably her greatest legacy. She didn't just change styles, she completely changed the shape of women's bodies in fashion. She literally let women breathe again, and the fashion world was never, ever the same. Okay, so that amazing story, the orphan who conquered the world, that's the one we usually hear. It's even the version told in the popular children's book series, Little People, Big Dreams. But when you start looking at how people, real readers, reacted to that simplified story, a very different and much, much darker side of Coco Chanel emerges. Yeah, this quote from a Goodreads review of that kid's book is pretty jarring. It just cuts right to the heart of the whole controversy, doesn't it? It completely challenges the idea of her as an inspirational figure, especially for kids. And that reviewer wasn't alone. Far from it. A lot of people who read that children's biography felt that its simple, inspiring story wasn't just incomplete, it was dangerously misleading because of what it chose to leave out. So let's look at the actual points these readers are making. They criticize the book for just glossing over unpleasant facts. The biggest one? The very serious accusation that she was a Nazi collaborator and a spy during World War II. Another review claims she used the war as a chance to shut down her business, which punished 4,000 employees who were on strike asking for fair wages. On top of all that, she's described as holding openly anti-Semitic views. So for these critics, this history makes her totally unsuitable as a role model. So what we're left with are these two completely opposite narratives. How do you even begin to reconcile the visionary designer with this deeply controversial person? It's like there are two different Chanels. On one hand, you've got Chanel the innovator, the absolute genius who changed how women dress forever. But then, on the other hand, you have Chanel the controversial figure, a person whose alleged actions during one of the darkest times in history cast a permanent shadow over everything she ever built. And this is really the core of her incredibly complicated legacy. The children's book shows us an icon of determination, someone who made their dreams come true. But its critics see her story not as an inspiration at all, but as a cautionary tale about who we choose to celebrate and why we do it. And that leaves us all with a fundamental question, one that goes way beyond just a single fashion designer. When we look back at people in history who did incredible things but also lived deeply problematic lives, what's the right way to tell their story? How should we remember our flawed heroes?